What's a family secret you didn't get told until you were older that made things finally make sense? Not all that extreme, but it was emotional for me. My grandfather was the typical tough, rugged mountain man. He never expressed emotion, and in fact rarely ever even spoke at family gatherings. He would just sit in the corner drinking beer. I never felt that he and I had a very good relationship, considering I was the weird artsy kid in the family. We didn't have much to talk about because we couldn't relate to each other well. He died of lung cancer 2 years ago. A couple of months after he died, I was visiting my parents and my mom pulled out a showbox that belonged to him filled with sentimental photographs that he kept hidden in his closet. Nobody knew about it until after he died, and they were cleaning his things out. Almost every single photograph was of me. It broke my heart. I wish I would have been closer to him. He clearly loved me a lot more than I thought he did. My mom was in the hospital, so I flew home. Me and my dad were hanging out getting drunk, and he started telling me family secrets, almost like he was trying to get a reaction out of me. An uncle was molested, an estranged aunt might actually have a different father than we thought, etc. The one that really got me was when he revealed that he used to do coke. I was imagining he meant like in his 20s. I said, when did you stop? And he said, I think you were about 19. Like effing what, man? My entire childhood. And he said, yup. Did mom know? Yes. How much? About 1 gram a week. At first it was completely insane to me, but looking back it made a ton of stuff make way more sense. Crazy mood swings, explosive fights. 1 minute he would be fine, and then suddenly he would be raving about something. I knew he drank, so I always blamed the instability in the house on that. But finding out he was regularly doing coke all my life was both astounding, and it made complete sense. My father always talked about how his brother lied to a doctor so he could get on disability. I thought it was so easy for anyone to get a disability check. All you had to do was tell your doctor you were abducted by aliens. Years later, my father had a mental breakdown. He started telling stories about the government implanting a chip in his brain. He went out and got a CAT scan as proof, and he would point to things that weren't there. My dad was diagnosed as a schizophrenic, and years later, he started collecting a disability check because he couldn't hold a job. Kind of hard to perform any job when every conversation, including interviews, veers into the government trying to F me in the ass. As an adult, it dawned on me when my aunt mentioned mental illness runs in the family. My uncle had never lied to his doctor. He told that doctor what he believed to be the absolute truth. He had been abducted by aliens. I have an uncle who is a hardcore alco and lived with my grandparents until they passed. We always thought he was just an unmotivated loser. I have another uncle that passed away well before I was born. Got hit by a car coming back from the store getting something for my grandparents. After both grandparents passed, my mom told me that the alco uncle was asked to go to the store, but bribed his little brother to go instead, which led to his death. My grandmother, who I have always held in very high regard, told my alcoholic uncle afterward that his brother would still be alive if he had gone to the store like she asked. I cannot imagine the guilt that would have laid on him, and completely understand why he ended up that way as a result. In my adult life I've found that my uncle is actually a pretty good man, just dealt a shitty hand. That my granny attempted suicide when my mom was in high school. My mom was the one that found her. Luckily she did find her, because if she hadn't she wouldn't have survived. It explains why my mom panics the way she does and jumps to conclusions all the time. If she can't get a hold of me or my brother on the phone, she automatically assumes we are dead and she panics. Recently, she couldn't get a hold of my brother for a few hours and she lost all composure and had a nervous breakdown. We just are starting to realize after all these years that she probably hasn't diagnosed PTSD. My brothers and I all share very distinctive teeth with my dad, but no one else in the family has it. After my gran died, I found some letters between her and my granddad while he was on national service. Going by the dates, granddad was in Malaya when my dad was conceived. Edit: the four of us all have severely crossed front teeth, right over left, and the bottom front row are crowded, all in the same way. I have no idea if dad knows, we don't really talk. Gran is visibly pregnant in the wedding photos, just about, and my granddad wasn't the brightest spark to it. Maybe he didn't realize. He absolutely doted on my dad, and they didn't have any more children. My grandpa burned to death. I found out he died when I was a kid, but was not allowed to go to his funeral, and they told me he had a heart attack. I was so confused because everyone around me would clam up when I asked about him. Turns out that he had a heart attack while trying to put out a field fire, collapsed, and burned. I still have no idea how long it took for people to find him, but I'm assuming it was hours. I didn't know one of my cousins existed until I was about 10 years old. Turns out he was diagnosed with leukemia as a child, and I was a very sensitive kid, so my family decided not to tell me until the treatment was successful and he recovered. It would have been okay if they told me as soon as he was healthy again, but I guess they forgot. So the first time I met him, I was wondering how exactly I managed to forget the existence of a whole person. My pet rabbit got attacked by something a couple years after I got it. My parents found it dead and replaced it before I found out. I just thought my rabbit lived super long, but it was actually 2 rabbits. This happened over 10 years ago, and I found out last year. My sister and I both got UTIs at the same time when our family was staying at our grandparents' house. One day my grandma took both of us aside and started what felt like an interrogation about whether any adult had touched us. Like, if something happened, you have to tell me right now. At the time, I felt gross, confused, and guilty, even though nothing had happened. It was just too intense. I later learned that my grandma had been sexually abused by her brother for years and her mother refused to believe her. Not all that extreme, but it was emotional for me. My grandfather was the typical tough, rugged mountain man. He never expressed emotion, and in fact rarely ever even spoke at family gatherings. He would just sit in the corner drinking beer. I never felt that he and I had a very good relationship, considering I was the weird artsy kid in the family. We didn't have much to talk about because we couldn't relate to each other well. He died of lung cancer 2 years ago. A couple of months after he died, I was visiting my parents and my mom pulled out a showbox that belonged to him filled with sentimental photographs that he kept hidden in his closet. Nobody knew about it until after he died and they were cleaning his things out. Almost every single photograph was of me. It broke my heart. I wish I would have been closer to him. He clearly loved me a lot more than I thought he did. My mom, aunts, and uncle always called my pap by his first name, not dad or anything. When I was a kid, I thought maybe he just wanted them to call him by his name. Then one day, my mum mentioned something about her dad. I think she means my pap. Nope. My mum was the product of an affair and both men, my gram's first husband and my mum's biological dad, thought of her as their own and basically co-parented. This was in the early 1960s. Both men raised my mum as their daughter until my gram's first husband passed away. And before anyone says anything about my gram, she was married off when she was 16 to an older man to save face for the family. It was not a marriage of love but convenience. She fell in love with my grandpa and had permission from her first husband to peruse the relationship. That place you visited, dad, and got to eat potato chips, and one of them was like an extra big potato chip. Yeah, that was jail. And it was because he was caught drunk driving while also having a bunch of cocaine. So I guess the don't do more than one illegal thing at a time advice he later gave me made sense. Also why we moved, and then he wasn't around for a while. Edit. For those of you wondering about the extra big potato chip, it was like 3 times the size of a normal chip. I saved it for last. Coupled with the fact that I didn't normally get to eat chips, I'm pretty sure that chip is the only reason I remember that day. When I was really young I never got why my dad wouldn't allow drinks like Kool-Aid in the house, especially if it was grape. Later in life I found out he was part of the cleanup crew for Jonestown. Edit. I didn't think it would get this much attention. I just thought it was weird that dad was so against all the drinks you mixed up from a powder, not even the country time stuff. I could have them at a friend's place though. My dad never called his stepmom anything but her real name, Margaret. He has 7 brothers and sisters and they all called her mom or some form of that. When I got older it turns out my grandpa was actually cheating on my real grandma, my dad's mom, with Margaret while she was dying for colon cancer. My dad was 5 when she dies, and as she was dying my dad had to call my grandpa to tell him to come home because she was dying. After that Margaret and her 3 kids moved in, and my dad was forced to live with his sister who was 18 and married. This was late 70s backcountry, so not abnormal for the time. From then until he turned 16, when he decided to move in with his best friend and his mom. So I learned that he probably has always had resentment towards Margaret because of everything that happened when he was so young, and never wanted to call her anything that resembled a mother because that's not what she was to him. My father was a capo from the Neapolitan Camorra, was wanted by the Interpol, and couldn't set a foot back in Italy without being immediately apprehended. He was also living under a stolen identity he used when he fled a high security prison in Italy. My last name never was my family name. That and much more. I used to like telling this story when I found out, since everyone thought I was lying or joking anyway. I was 12 and only found out because my mom broke down after father was detained in Spain while we lived in Argentina, which meant he might never come back to us. He escaped prison again a year later. I was an only child and my mother was 40 and father 50 when they had me. They had gotten together rather late in life. My mother always told me that my father didn't want her to get pregnant because he was afraid she was too old and didn't want anything happening to her or the baby. After my father passed away at the age of 95, I took my mother to the Social Security office to take care of paperwork. One of the questions they asked was whether there were any other potential beneficiaries of my father's benefits, such as other children or ex-wives. Being an only child, I immediately answered no. My mother looked at me sheepishly and answered, "That's not exactly correct." It was then, at the age of 45 in the Social Security building, that I learned that my father had previously been married in his 20s and had had a child. Mother and baby died during childbirth. It explained why my parents never had children until late in life, and why he had not wanted to. Out of 4 girls, I'm the only one who can biologically have kids. I didn't find out until I was 24, and then only because my mom wanted me to shut the F up asking my recently married sister when we are going to have kids. I now understand why my parents were so grossly underprepared to explain menstruation to me, the 3rd daughter. They'd never had to do it before. Edit. I'm not going to go into detail, but the reason is chromosomal. They basically don't have the necessary internal parts and had to take hormone therapy. Edit 2. Don't ask people when/if they are going to have kids. I had to learn this lesson the hard way, but you don't have to. It's none of your goddamn business. My cousin that is a year younger than what we thought was the youngest sibling is our brother. His mom is my dad's niece. It's what finally made my mom file for divorce. The drew, alcohol, beatings, cheating, she could overlook, but having an affair with his niece and then having a baby was the last straw. We grew up thinking he was our cousin. I guess that's true. He called my dad dad, and we never questioned it cause we thought he was just copying his older cousins. Only my mom and siblings know about it when it all came out, when my dad died. I found out when I was 15, but never said anything to anyone. I grew up never knowing my paternal grandpa. The last time I saw him in person was when I was 5, and he was in prison. Turns out my aunt made some particularly shitty teenage decisions that ended in my grandpa getting framed for drug trafficking. He got hit with a 20-year sentence. No amount of appeals would get his case reopened, and he was deported as soon as he was let out. My grandpa's one of the strongest, kindest people I've known, but since he's in his 80s now, and I don't have the money to see him, he'll probably pass away before I get the chance to see him in person again.